Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our September meeting of the Florida Credentials Review Committee. I'm Katie Crowfoot, Director of the Reimagining Education and Career Help, or REACH office within the Executive Office of the Governor.
Program modernization project.
We just make sure everybody's muted. Awesome, thank you. And chair of this committee. This meeting was supposed to take place last week. We thank you so much for your flexibility into having it this week. And our thoughts are with our committee members and partners who were impacted by the hurricane as they continue the process of recovery. So with that, as you all know, the Credentials Review Committee is supported by CareerSource Florida, the Governor's Principal Workforce Policy Board, and I invite Jackie Barreros for CareerSource Florida to please call the roll. And members, can you please unmute yourselves when you're speaking? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Katie Crowfoot.
Here.
Timothy Beard. Michael Biskey. Robert Boyd.
I'm here.
Was that Michael Biskey? No. Robert?
Yeah, I'm here.
Gotcha. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
Jackie, you're on
Jackie,
mute
you're
now.
muted.
Sorry, it looks like someone muted me. I'm going to start back with Chancellor Paul Burns.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Adam Calloway. Kevin Carr. Christopher Constantine.
I am here. Happy to be here.
Welcome. Catherine Golitz. Lloyd Gregg.
Present.
Diane Head.
You hear something?
Sorry, there was a really bad echo. Diane Head. Chancellor Kathy Hebda. Debbie Magruder.
I'm here.
Kathy Hebda's here too.
Thank you, Chancellor. Chancellor Kevin O'Farrell.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Really, I have that time? Are you kidding me?
Chancellor
I can't
Raymond
even get this
Rodriguez.
done.
Chancellor Raymond Rodriguez. Or Emily Seitz.
Hi, good morning. I'm here. This is
Thank
Emily.
you. James Taylor. And Lindsay.
There we go. Yes, I'm here. Sorry, James Taylor.
Thank you,
Lindsay
Mr.
Volpe
Taylor.
is here.
Welcome, Lindsay. And we have a quorum.
Great. Thank you so much, Jackie. So it's my pleasure to welcome our newest member of the Credentials Review Committee, Dr. Christopher Constantine. Dr. Constantine is a private consultant with more than 30 years experience in the semiconductor and plasma science industry sectors. He's involved with technology curriculum design and implementing sub-baccalaureate training methods within Florida's high-tech industries. I'm confident he will be a valuable member of this committee in its ongoing discussion about the value of credentials and lifelong learning. Welcome, Dr. Constantine. I'll give you I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to say a few words, we have a minute for that.
I appreciate it. Thanks. I'm actually sitting here at Valencia College right now. I'm in the middle of teaching an accelerated skills class in robotics and semiconductor technology. It's something that I believe through your august group and the governor himself seems to have spurred this technology going forward. We have 15 students in this first cohort, and the second cohort is already sold out. So it looks like something that may be interesting and perhaps even important, honestly, to the business in the state of Florida. For many, many years, Florida has led the nation in many respects with the semiconductor business overall. I moved here because I ran a company in St. Petersburg that built large plasma reactors directly for the semiconductor business. And we always had several very large manufacturing fabs here, mostly in the central part of the state where I am right now. Unfortunately, the grand bulk of them have left the state. And I think that having a workforce development program very similar to or like this one at Valencia right now is an important first step in trying to get these businesses to consider Florida once again as a semiconductor center of excellence. So I applaud the state. I certainly applaud the governor. I applaud all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this group. I just don't know what it is that I could possibly offer to y'all, but I'll certainly give it my best.
Well, we're so excited to have you. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So before we get to today's agenda, I have an update on the summer. On this, sorry, 1 second. I think okay, we're good. So before we get to today's agenda, I have an update on work this summer since our last meeting. After the May meeting, an appeal of a decision by this committee on additions to the master credentials list was received by CareerSource Florida as required by the committee charter. The appeal was reviewed and the credential applications that were appealed were reevaluated for consideration. The reevaluation resulted in an affirmation of the denial. This recommendation was brought to the CareerSource Florida Executive Committee for action on July 25th, and the Executive Committee approved the recommendation to deny the application, and the appellate was notified along with the credentialing body. So moving on to today's agenda, members, you received the meeting agenda packet last week. The agenda packet is posted on the Credentials Review Committee website, and a link is posted on the Credentials Review Committee. A link has been placed in the chat for your convenience. So let's go over today's agenda. We have 2 consent items today: approval of meeting minutes for our May meeting and approval of an updated Credentials Review Committee charter that complies with legislation that was effective July 1. The minutes and revised charter are in your meeting packet. The charter identifies the authorities and powers of this committee, its key deliverables, process for approval of credentials of value, and the process to appeal the decisions of this committee. We have 3 action items for consideration: additions to the 23-24 master credentials list and revisions to the framework of quality. Jamie Gerald, Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, will present our 3rd action item, a process to incorporate agricultural credentials into the master credentials list. CareerSource Florida Senior Vice President Dan McGrew will present a preview of the 24-25 master credentials list. CareerSource Florida Senior Director Dr. Adam Briggs will provide an analysis of the Lightcast Credentials Review final report. Senior Program Analyst Jackie Barreros will provide an update on enhancements to the Master Credentialist application process. And then Florida Department of Education Vice Chancellor Tara Goodman will provide information on the application timeline for career and professional education funding for the 24-25 school year. After these presentations, there will be an opportunity for open discussion and public comment. So some reminders before we get to our first order of business. There are opportunities for public comment after the consent item is introduced, after the presentation of the action item, and again at the end of the meeting. If you wish to comment, please contact Madison Frazee at mfrazee@careersourceflorida.com. I'll spell that out for those of you on the phone, mfrazee@careersourceflorida.com. Additionally, you can put your name and request into the meeting chat and wait to be recognized. Please identify yourself by name when you are called upon so we can record you properly in the minutes of the meeting. Please unmute your microphones when speaking and then mute yourself when you are not speaking as to avoid the feedback. We look forward to all committee members' engagement in today's important discussion as it represents the completion of a quarterly milestone in the important work of this committee. So let's now move on to today's consent items. As mentioned, we have 2 consent items for today's meeting. The first is approval of the meeting minutes for the committee May 18th meeting, which are in your agenda. The second consent item is on revisions to the Credentials Review Committee Charter. As you will recall in previous meetings, we discussed the passage of Senate Bill 240 and its impact on the Credentials Review Committee. To ensure compliance with the law, the Credentials Review Committee Charter is updated to comply with the statutory requirements for the committee's membership. The role of its chair, authorities and powers, meetings and communication, operations, key deliverables in the process for approving credentials of value, and the requirement to communicate with those submitting credentials. For your background, these include the following important high-level points. The director of the REACH office shall serve as the chair of the Credentials Review Committee. The law eliminates committee's role in developing a return value funding formula. The evidence that committee may use to determine if a credential meets labor market demand is expanded to include information provided by the Labor Market Statistics Center within the Florida Department of Commerce and Labor Market Estimating Conference. Updates to the charter also include changes to the timeline for appeals and removal of required annual financial disclosures for committee members. Is there a motion to approve the consent item?
Kevin O'Farrell, so moved.
Is there a second?
Mike
Second.
Disney, second.
Chris Constantine, second.
I saw Dr. Constantine, so let's and any discussion? Are there any comments or questions from the public? I don't think we've got any there. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those
Aye.
opposed say no. Okay, the consent agenda passes. Thank you. So moving on to our action items. The REACH Act established the Credentials Review Committee to identify non-degree credentials and degree credentials of value for approval by the State Board of Education and inclusion on the Master Credentials list. Such credentials must include registered apprenticeship programs, industry certifications, licenses, advanced technical certificates, college credit certificates, career certificates, applied technology diplomas, Associate of Science and Associate of Applied Science degrees, and Bachelor of Science and Bachelor's of Applied Science degrees. So I'd like to introduce Dan McGrew to present the first action item. Dan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. As Chair Crowfoot stated, it's required by statute that the Credentials Review Committee is charged with reviewing and approving credentials for inclusion on the state's master credentials list each quarter. This quarter, we received a total of 18 applications for credentials by the June 30th deadline. These 18 applications represented 15 unique credentials. 2 of those applications received were for credentials that were already on the master credentials list and therefore did not require an evaluation. Their status remained unchanged. 6 of the applications were already on the master credentials list, but were seeking approval for CAPE post-secondary funding. And the remaining 7 applications were for new credentials that were not currently on the master credentials list. Each application was reviewed by an interagency review team with members from the Florida Department of Commerce, Florida Department of Education, and CareerSource Florida. And the evaluation results are reflected in today's action item, which is the recommendation to approve the addition of 1 new credential to the 2023-2024 master credentials list. This new credential did meet the requirements of the framework of quality, and as a result is recommended for addition to the state list. Credentials not recommended for approval as required by the revisions to the REACH Act and Senate Bill 240 and reflected in the charter that was just approved will be sent notices of deficiency to both the applicant and the credentialing body detailing what exactly was deficient and an invitation to reapply and information about the appeals process. So again, the approval of today's action item will result in the addition of 1 new credential to the 2023-2024 master credentials list and send that recommendation to the CareerSource Florida Board of Directors for delivery to the State Board of Education. Additionally, this approval of this action item allows the Florida Department of Education to make any technical revisions to the list as needed without adding or removing any credentials that were not explicitly described in this action item. As a reminder, sometimes technical revisions are required if there is a name change or the company that administers the credential changes. These are not substantive revisions to the list in any way, just technical revisions. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any questions for Dan? Is there a motion to approve the action item?
Motion to approve. This is Chris.
Second, Kevin O'Farrell.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any discussion? Are there any comments or questions from the public? No? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, no. The motion passes. Thank you. Our second action item is revision to the framework of quality approved by this committee. And Dan has an overview of this action item. Dan?
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. The framework of quality that it was used to create the 2023-2024 master credentials list and the additions to the list that were approved in May and today was originally approved in December 2022. And as a reminder, that framework of quality was a result of this committee's work over the first 15 months of the existence of this committee. And as stated, that framework approved was used to create that first 2023 master credentials list. The revisions being proposed to the framework of quality today are needed due to updates to Florida statute and to the availability of new labor market data. A summary of the revisions, as indicated in the action item, are as follows. First, we've reflected the availability of new labor market data from the Labor Market Estimating Conference, which met on July 14th, 2023. And the Florida Department of Commerce, which released new demand occupation lists, were released in May. We removed the references to demand occupation lists from 2020 to 2022, which ensures that the labor market data used for the framework of quality is only the most recent labor market data released by the Labor Market Estimating Conference and the Florida Department of Commerce. We also removed references in the framework of quality to the Department of Economic Opportunity, which with recent statute changes is now the Florida Department of Commerce. And finally, we added the definition of industry certification to the framework of quality. Prior to this revision, the definition of an industry certification was in statute and also in the Career and Professional Education Rule, which is governed by the Florida Department of Education. Moving the definition or including the definition in the framework of quality just provides one place for that definition to be stated, rather than having to point or reference to other sources for that definition. The definition itself remains unchanged from statute or from what is in that CAPE rule. So these recommended revisions, if approved, would be used to evaluate any credentials seeking inclusion on the master credentials list from July 1st, 2023 onward. As a reminder for this committee, the last applications deadline was June 30th, 2023. So those applications were evaluated under the currently existing framework of quality. These revisions would go into place upon your approval from July 1st onward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any questions for Dan? Is there a motion to approve the action item?
Jim Taylor, motion to approve.
Jim Taylor, and then second?
Mike Biskey.
Second. Great, thank you. Any discussion, the action item? Are there any comments or questions from the public? All those in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, no? Great, the motion Committee members will recall that we have received public comments from industry representatives from the agricultural industry during our meetings. Comments have helped to educate the committee on the challenges with assessing agricultural occupations, which often lack labor market data in the traditional sense against the framework of quality. As indicated in statute and in this committee's charter, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, in cooperation with the Institute of Food Sciences at the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, shall submit industry certifications for agriculture occupations to the CRC to be considered for placement on the master credentials list. These credentials of value are vital to our state's agricultural and aquaculture industries, and CareerSource Florida has worked closely with partners, stakeholders, and the Department of Agriculture to develop a process for incorporating these credentials into the master credentials list. It's my pleasure to invite Jamie Jarrells, Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, to present on the process for incorporating essential agriculture credentials on the master credentials list. Jamie?
Thank you, Chairman Crowfoot. Thank you, committee members, for your thoughtful consideration of this action item today. As you know, agriculture is the #2 driver of our economy, and so we definitely want to ensure that these credentials get out into the workforce and into the future of agriculture employees and employers in our state. A huge thank you to Dan at CareerSource and his team, and also Chairman Crowfoot for her help and guidance in developing this process. I hope you will find it, you will consider it to be effective in reviewing these credentials. So credentials linked to agriculture occupations that do not meet demand and wage criteria of the framework of quality established by you will apply directly to the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to be considered for inclusion on the master's credentials list. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services will evaluate that for demand and wage. The Department of Education will receive applicable information that we receive from the application to evaluate CAPE eligibility. And then, of course, Florida Commerce will receive applicable information that we receive from the application to evaluate sought linkages. If you'll please change the slide, we'll review just a flow chart of how this process will work. So phase 1, FDACS will make available the application for agriculture credentials linked to sought codes that do not meet the framework of quality, demand, and/or wage criteria. We will receive those applications for agriculture certifications. Notification of receipt of those applications will be sent to applicable internal FDACS staff. Confirmation of receipt will also be sent to the applicant. FDACS, a staff internal working group, including subject matter experts within our individual divisions, will evaluate demand and wage for the agricultural credential submitted. The FDACS staff will coordinate and collaborate with the University of Florida Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, as well as Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University per statute. We will then notify CareerSource Florida of both approved and denied agricultural certifications and forward on that information from the application to the Department of Education and Florida Commerce for their decision points. You can move to slide 2 for second phase. CareerSource Florida will send information to both of those departments, DOE and Florida Commerce. DOE will evaluate the application for CAPE eligibility, and Florida Commerce will evaluate sought linkages. Both DOE and Commerce will submit their decisions to CareerSource Florida. CareerSource Florida places the certifications in front of the Credentials Review Committee to be considered for placement on the Master Credentials list. And then finally, notification of approval and/or denial with reasoning will be sent to the applicant by CareerSource Florida. Chairman Crowfoot, I'll entertain any questions that the committee may have in terms of process.
Yeah, are there any questions for Jamie?
Hi, Mike Biskey. Jamie, thank you. I know there was some very spirited conversation at our December meeting from the agricultural community. And within the framework that we had established, it just fell outside the box. And I think I can speak for myself. I felt pretty bad not being able to entertain what they were asking for. And I appreciate you bringing forth a process to allow that. that group of credential-seeking, job-providing entities to have an opportunity to join the master credential list. So thank you very much for this.
I appreciate those words, sir. We are very appreciative to be included and considered in this process. I understand the spirited discussion. I'm from that industry. I know them well. They're very passionate about it, as they should be. And we definitely want to preserve the economic driver that agriculture is in our state. And this is one valuable way to do that.
Any other questions for Jamie? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, Jamie. Having heard Ms. Gerald's presentation, we turn to action item 3, the process for the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services submission of credentials to the Credentials Review Committee. So Dan, would you like to present the actual action item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Jamie, and the entire Florida Department of Agriculture for the commitment to, creating this process within a process, if you will. What you have in front of you, committee members, and as you've heard over the past year, we've heard from stakeholders in agriculture, public comment in our meetings. I've been working very closely with the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to address those needs of the agricultural industry, and the proposed process today is a result of those ongoing discussions and would go into effect immediately. As you heard from Ms. Gerald, the only credentials that would need to apply directly to FDACs would be those credentials that are linked to standard occupation classification codes that are included in the process memo that is attached with the action item. Those SOC codes were identified based on the fact that they are specific to the agriculture industry, and these are the ones that do not meet the framework of quality, wage, or demand standards. For the agriculture credentials that are linked to SOC codes that do meet the framework of quality, wage, or demand standards, they would apply via the normal process, and they would be evaluated in that way. So we pre-identified SOC codes that did not have the labor market signaling, and included those in that memo that's included there. And the plan is for that list to update every year as new labor market data is available. But the credentials, any credentials linked to those specific SOC codes would apply, as you heard, directly to FDACs and have their demand and wage criteria assessed directly by subject matter experts in the agriculture industry and with the consultation with University of Florida IFAS and Florida A&M University as required by statute. If approved by FDACs, then the already established interagency evaluation team would take those approvals and conduct the remainder of the evaluation, which is to validate the credential criteria, assess for CAPE funding eligibility, validate the SOC linkages, and make recommendations for approval to this committee. This recommended process does meet the required statutory elements that are included in Florida Statute 570.07 and Florida Statute 445.004, both of which were cited in the memo that was included with the action item. And approval of this action item would result in immediate implementation of this new process. So thank you, members of the committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any questions for Dan? Okay, committee members, is there a motion to approve the action item?
Mike Biskey, motion to approve.
Thank you, Mike. Second?
Ms. Constantine?
Steve
second
Volpe,
that?
second.
Okay.
Thank you, Volpe. Any discussion? Are there any comments or questions from the public? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, no. The motion passes. So information on this process will be added to the Credentials Review Committee website. Thank you all, and thank you, Jamie, for your hard work on this. We really appreciate the partnership. So I now invite Dan McGrew to present to the committee a preview of the 24-25 Master Credentialists. Dan, take it away.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, and thank you again, members of the committee. One of the one of the real hallmarks and things that we wanted to do here today is to preview what that 24-25 master credentials list would look like given the new labor market information. It is a clear charge in statute that the goal of the master credentials list is to remain up to date and reflective of the current labor market demands and wages in our state. And in order to provide credentialing bodies, applicants, school districts with as much advance notice as possible, that's where we're provided the preview that was included in your agenda packet. Recognizing that it is 130 pages, this is not the final list by any means, but really just wanted to provide a look at what the reevaluation of credentials looked like. So if you move to the next slide, I'll walk through kind of what that list is reflective of. So once the new labor market data was made available from the Labor Market Estimating Conference from their July convening, and soon after the new wage criteria that was provided, and the demand occupation lists that were created by the Department of Commerce, the team took that information to conduct a reevaluation of all of the credentials that were on the existing 23-24 master credentials list. So what you have in your packet, that preview list, does show the results of that evaluation. In addition to that new labor market data, the Framework of Quality does include a bottom wage or a wage floor that occupations that credentials are linked to must be above in order to be eligible to be evaluated for sequencing. And we used the new 2022 Florida Education and Training Placement Information Program report, which is the $27,876, which is the median income for high school graduates with no other credential. The Framework of Quality establishes that whatever that median income is for high school graduates with no other credential would be the wage floor. So that is the new median income for this upcoming year. So that was applied as well. Credentials on that list have been marked as either approved and they're on the list because they meet the criteria, or they've been granted provisional status, meaning they either did not meet the wage criteria or the demand criteria, or both, and notes to what elements were missing are included in that. We issued a memo to all credentialing institutions and schools, letting them know that anybody with provisional status will remain on the list through June 30th, 2025. The revisions to statute require that we cannot remove any credential from the master credentials list without providing a 1-year notice. Okay, so anything that's on there right now will remain on the list in their current standing, CAPE eligibility, et cetera, through June 30th, 2025. So that memo is currently posted on the website, and this list reflects that. So again, no credentials were removed in this reevaluation. Additionally, we did add some additional columns to show the type of demand that the credential met, whether it was statewide demand, regional demand, or as we get applications for credentials that require local demand, we would indicate that as well in the additional columns. So back in May, we added some columns to show the standard occupation classification code linkage, and this is just another iteration to provide some more information for the credentialing entities or for those that are interested. Okay. If we move to the next slide, please. Just want to provide an update on this 24-25 master credentials list preview. There are a total of 2,108 credentials. And you can see what that breakdown looks like by types of credential: degree, non-degree, apprenticeships, industry certifications, and K-8 digital tools. A total of 416 of those credentials are on provisional status, if you will, or notified, hey, you don't meet wage or you don't meet demand. You're on the list through June 30th, 2025. That can be cured, right? The wage not meeting the wage criteria can be cured by establishing a sequence to another credential that leads to an occupation that does meet the wage criteria. Or for demand, establishing local demand. So, but in the meantime, until that happens through June 30th, 2025, these credentials will remain on the master credentials list and eligible for any and all funding or programming that affords them. Also important to note that with the new labor market data, we had 106 credentials, total credentials, that were provisional on the 2023-2024 that now meet the demand or the wage criteria. And again, I think this indicates, this is really illustrative of what the statute calls for us to do in creation of this master credentials list and ensuring that it continually points to the most recent labor market data. And you see credentials that were below wage or not meeting state or regional demand now are meeting those pieces, right? And just as a reminder for the committee, the framework of quality includes a very important piece where local demand may be established or sequencing may be established so that in the event the labor market data is not, fully current with what's happening within a local community, local demand can be established, and there are processes and detailed on the website for that, and sequencing relationships may be established for that as well. Between the next step for this 24-25 master credentials list, you will hear a little bit later today from Vice Chancellor Tara Goodman. Applications to be included on this list will be received through September 30th. And then the evaluation for those credentials will take place through the fall, and the very first iteration of the official 24-25 master credentials list will be presented to this committee at our February 2024 meeting, well in advance of the 24-25 school year, so schools can plan accordingly and appropriately. In the meantime, we will continue. This is just a reflection of the reevaluation of the current 23-24 master credentials list. Since the first time that list was created, new credentials, new apprenticeships, new certifications are starting to be offered within our public education system. So we will evaluate those items as well. So what will be presented to you in February will be this list, plus applications that were received by September 30th that meet the new framework of quality that you approved today, and any new credentials that are now in existence in our education system that we're going to automatically evaluate those as well against the new labor market data. So that's kind of a preview of what's to come over the next handful of months, but please mark your calendars for February 2024. 2024. So February 2024, which will be the meeting where this committee will consider and evaluate the very first 24-25 master credentials list. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to answer any questions about the list.
Thank you, Dan. Are there any questions for Dan? Hearing none. Okay. Thank you, Dan. At our May meeting, Matthew Walsh from Lightcast presented a status update on a contracted research analysis being conducted for CareerSource Florida. This research was initiated to inform this committee on sequencing relationships between credentials. Since the May meeting, Lightcast concluded its research and its final report was provided in materials for this meeting. To present information on the use of research to determine credential sequencing, I invite Dr. Adam Briggs to present. Adam?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Credentials Review Committee. My report today will serve to close out the updates for the research engagement with Lightcast conducted during the first half of 2023. You received, as the chair noted, an update from Matthew Walsh of Lightcast at your last meeting on May the 18th. As you will recall, the research conducted by Lightcast involved analysis of credential signaling in both job ads and social profiles, and the emphasis of this research was on non-degree credentials. Their final report, which you can find linked on the Credentials Review Committee portion of our CareerSource Florida website under the boardroom tab can be found at that location. So just to turn to page 14 of the report, I'd like to take a moment to highlight a few of LICAST's recommendations that may inform the future work of this committee. In the first place, the report notes that earlier work on these lines, analyzing non-degree credentials, specifically credential and SOC relationships for a considerable plurality of the credentials in that grouping, was conducted manually. LICAST offered an algorithmic approach, which we may be able to benefit from continuing in future research. This work, moreover, reflects what we might call the progressive elaboration that comes from collaborative research, building on prior research efforts. Looking ahead, this committee can decide how best to use the data, this information provided by LICAST in both their report and in their tool, which I'll be turning to in just a moment, to establish official sequences of credentials, in addition to the presence of articulation agreements. More about that in just a moment. Similarly, this research and work may reveal opportunities to prioritize and consolidate credentials in those fields where there is there are multiple credentials that are effectively competing against one another. That will be more true in some fields than in others. As was noted during the May report out, some fields, for example, healthcare, IT, and business, have clearer signaling and suggestions of potential intercredential relationships than what we see in other fields. We see this especially in fields where there's a high degree of regulation. And lastly, from page 14 of the report, among the recommendations, I would note that this information represents an opportunity for us to engage employers to understand their needs and to dig into why some credentials in certain fields offer low signaling value. So this can inform our analysis going forward. So on the remainder of this slide, you'll see discussion of the interactive tool that was created by LICAST. You can find the report, as I noted, on our CareerSource Florida website under the boardroom tab under committee resources. In that report on page 14, I covered some of the key recommendations. On page 21 of the report, likewise, you'll find a link to the Tableau public tool that they created for this analysis that they completed during the engagement. So as we've learned in the February and May meetings, this work is essentially focused on non-degree credentials and connecting these credentials to occupations and effectively creating credentials to credentials. I'll show some examples of that on the next slide. Not yet, though, please. This tool, as you will find when you explore it, allows you to search along both credential and occupational pathways, and I'll walk you through the mechanics of that here in just a moment. More generally, I would suggest that there is some potential value for this work in the context of other research being conducted by OPAGA and by the Florida Department of Education on articulation agreements. In a similar way to our own framework of quality, which is itself multi-factor. There's probably strength in a composite approach. The research conducted by LICAST, given the nature of the data, where there were, as we learned in May, there were multiple millions of records on both the job ad side and the social profile side, involved necessarily and unavoidably some instances where the individual had essentially pursued and achieved credentials that really are not related to each other. And so those are, contained within the data set. And I think this points to the strength of our established credential SOC validation process. That's a multi-partner effort and is the foundation for all the work that this interagency review team conducts. It points to the strength of that as essentially a quality check or quality safeguard. All right, next slide, please. So here you see an example from the report of a sort of a typical kind of progression that you can use the interactive tool to generate. It starts with the initial credential, the CompTIA A+, and you get a one-to-many linkage to multiple SOCs. The highest level SOC being the Computer Network Support Specialist, which then can be used to build an occupation to occupation bridge, this being the requirement of the law when a credential itself does not meet the wage threshold on its own. It can signal a relationship, indicate a relationship to the next level occupation that does meet the wage threshold. So you see that pathway here. And then we get, again, a one-to-many at the end where we see the credentials sort of mapping back the several credentials on the far right that connect to the Computer and Information Systems Manager next level occupation. Next slide, please. Finally, you see a graphic here from the latter pages of the report, reproduced here for your consideration. And this graphic differs from the prior slide in that it contains actual SOC codes and names. So you have at the top SOC code 492091, avionics technician, which maps to the credential FAA Aviation Maintenance Tech. And then the next, the average entry level the average entry level salary on the right at the top for that SOC is the avionics technician salary at $48,370. And moving down to the middle of the graphic, the average salary for the next level occupation, which is SOC code 493011, aircraft mechanics and service technicians, is involves a salary jump to $55,892, and then mapping from that next level occupation back to the credentials that associate to it. We see several here on the far right at the bottom corner: airline maintenance procedures and records management, FAA aviation mechanic technician airframe, and the others that you see listed there. So looking ahead, as our statewide partner group continues to strengthen and refine its approach to analyzing and validating credential sequences and pathways, we look forward to using, wherever appropriate, the information generated by the Lightcast research and their interactive tool. Madam Chair, that concludes my report this morning.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Dr. Briggs?
Yes, this is Jim Taylor. I have a question.
Go for it.
So at first I'm looking at the credential sequencing map and it's impressive. I'm wondering, and it may be too late to do something like this, but it seems like a very simple feature is missing, which would just be a search. To be able to search for something, because to try and find, for instance, if I'm looking for credentials around cybersecurity, to have to go through all the levels to find where that is within this would, well, so far in 6 minutes, I haven't been able to do it. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And then my other concern is Technology obviously is my concern from Florida Technology Council. There's so many tech jobs that now are created that are out there, and I have a difficult time finding those with this, because it would just be like computer and technology. Well, true, but is cybersecurity tucked into that? Is, I can think of 20 different tech things that are, it's so wide now. I'm wondering if we need to be able to have a way to drill down a little bit further with this tool.
Sure, these are some great points. I'll start with your second one, if I may. And you made some compelling comments on these lines at the May meeting when you talked about the multiplicity of primary areas within your field. On your first point, I agree that there's a certain presumption of awareness of what you're looking for or what the relationships are among the various factors in the first place, which may you may have put your finger on an opportunity to offer an additional for those who want to just do a basic search to explore what that might look like. We will take your comments and consult with our partners, especially at the Florida Department of Commerce, to explore the art of the possible there, and look forward to providing you with an update based on their recommendations.
If I could, Chair, continue a question. So Adam, first, thank you for always rephrasing what I say and making it sound so much better. I appreciate that. Second, when you do ask that, if you can ask them to keep in mind, what I'm really looking for is industry as a whole, not just technology, but across the board, looks at things far differently than education would. So I'm trying to find a way for industry to look at this and say, oh, here's what's missing for us. And it's not as apparent for me coming from industry to be able to look and find that. And that's why I was saying, like cyber security, for instance, what are all the different credential certifications that are available? If there's an easier way for us to find that, then there's an easier way for us to participate, to say, you know what, this might be missing and we could add this. Now, certainly we still have to do all the, how does this align to SIP to SOP crosswalk, all the rest of that, but it would let us get to this starting point and be able to, I think, contribute a little bit better.
Thank you for that feedback, Member Taylor.
Anyone else have any questions or comments for Dr. Briggs? No? Okay, well, thank you so much. So one of the hallmarks of the work of this committee and its support staff from the Department of Education, Florida Commerce, and CareerSource Florida is the focus on continuous improvement. The REACH office worked closely with CareerSource Florida and partners to improve the process by which applications are received for credentials of value to be added to the Master Credentials List and the Career and Professional Education Act industry funding list. This includes enhancements to provide a fast track for applications that require sequencing and local demand information to be updated without submitters having to submit an entirely new application. Technical assistance documents posted in March are also in the process of being simplified and updated. Jackie Barreros from CareerSource Florida joins us with an update. Jackie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Master Credentials List online application was launched last February, if you'll recall. This allowed applicants to submit credentials via an online form to be evaluated against the framework of quality for the Master Credentials List. As part of the application review process, CareerSource Florida communicates with applicants regarding deficiencies that would need to be addressed for a credential to be fully approved and added to the Master Credentials List. One such example is when the credential does not meet state or regional demand or the wage criteria within the framework of quality. This includes the credentials and provisional status that Dan mentioned when he previewed the 2024-2025 Master Credentials List. In this scenario, the applicant would need to provide additional information showing the credential meets local demand, or as part of a sequence of credentials that are required for the next level occupation that does meet the wage criteria as outlined in the framework of quality. Nathan, next slide, please. We understand the Master Credentials List application process is still very new, and we are mindful mindful, that the full online application asks for a lot of detailed information. It's information that's needed for the review of the application, but it can be somewhat cumbersome if you've already provided an application. For these reasons, we have started the development of a fast-track approach for applicants who need to supply additional information for a secondary review of a previously submitted application for things like local demand and credential sequencing. Due to the stage that we are in the development of the master credentials list and processes that go with it, we see this scenario more often with credentials needing to prove local demand. Therefore, we are first developing a fast track for local demand applicants. Once the fast track feature is turned on, applicants needing to submit additional information would simply visit the online application that's currently on our website and start by letting us know whether they are there to submit a new application or provide additional information on a previous application. Those applicants providing additional information would then receive the same local demand questions as those within the full application. This allows applicants that are applying for the first time and already know that they're applying for local demand to do so in the full application, but also allows those that are coming back just for the additional information to go straight to that information. Using, of course, unique identifiers and some additional, some quick questions at the forefront, if you will, that will allow us to identify which application is being served up. This approach allows the applicant to focus on specific supplemental information without having to submit the full application, and it promotes efficiency for the applicant and the reviewers alike. The local demand fast track approach is in development, and we anticipate being able to offer it soon online. In addition to the enhancements to the online application, our team has updated existing technical assistance documents to reflect continued process improvements. These updated documents will be posted on the Master Credentials List page of our website following this meeting. And once the fast track application enhancements for local demand are completed, we will update the local demand technical assistance document accordingly. These enhancements to the online application reflect our continued desire to provide clear, responsive customer service, and we hope that all of our applicants will find it useful and more streamlined. Thank you for the opportunity to present these updates. I would be happy to take any questions from committee members.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions from committee members on the process updates?
Madam Chair, this is Constantine. May I ask a quick question, please, for Jackie?
Yes, yes.
One of my concerns actually is the idea of local demand. I understand the rationale, I really do. What I worry about is that some areas, such as advanced manufacturing, is kind of putting the tail before the dog. Doing workforce development, but yet a lot of the industry is kind of to be developed. So does that put that credentialing at a disadvantage if indeed there are only limited numbers of advanced manufacturing within the state now? However, it seems to, I believe, be targeted certainly by this Department of Commerce and perhaps, as I understand it, by this governor. So I can speak to several different, advanced manufacturing industries. Semiconductor is one, of course, things like photovoltaics, my goodness, lithium-ion batteries. All of these things are within the skill set of the people certainly that I deal with and have dealt with. However, many of the companies haven't moved here as yet. And this is the chicken and egg, we could use any term we want, catch 22, either way. This is kind of my question, and I wonder if you might just educate me a bit on it.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Constantine. So I don't have the full application in front of me right this moment, but I can tell you that we ask a lot of questions about emerging industries and where that falls. And then we have follow-up questions that offer the applicant plenty of opportunities to provide us with a lot of detailed information about how that credential leads to a job that would have hopefully high skills, high wages, et cetera. And all of that is reviewed by subject matter experts in these fields and at the Department of Education and Department of Commerce and linking it to the right SOCs. So there's a lot of work that goes into that behind the scenes that isn't necessarily, you're not seeing on these slides. But I agree with you. It's complex work. It really is. And it takes a lot of hands and a lot of minds to look through this and find those connections. Adam, I see your hand up. You might have something to add.
Madam Chair, may I
Absolutely.
amplify a bit? Yes. So the local demand member Constantine, first of all, welcome and thank you for your already eager and engaged participation. The local demand feature is intended to address the very concern that I think you expressed, if I understood your comment correctly. That is to say, if we look at the two models that really exist in relation to each other, the deductive model, if you will, the top down, the state level data driven model is the empirical basis for what is relevant across the state or at the state level. But in the case of emerging, to Jackie's point, in the case of emerging industries, which have yet to bubble up, as it were, to that state level, that are growing in that direction, the local demand feature is a mechanism for that emerging need to be expressed, which presumably over time would then bubble up to that state level empirical data. So that was the only thing that I would add to Jackie's response.
And if I may, I would like to also add, Madam Chair, if it's okay, in that piece, when you're proving local demand, just a reminder, we ask for 3 letters of endorsement. So those credentials are endorsed by industry, by education, and by the local workforce development board. And that, in essence, makes up a lot of the pieces that are kind of missing when you're looking at a emerging industry, because we realize that there's a lot of information not yet there. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, and I'll chime in as well just to round it out a little bit for you, Dr. Constantine. So you have identified the gap for us. So emerging industries are incredibly difficult for us with the data that we have at our fingertips right now. But this Credentials Review Committee gives us a unique opportunity to bring industry and education partners and our workforce training partners together to identify those emerging demands. And so I know it's a conversation that we've had before, and I think this is probably a great time to task our team behind the scenes, our steering committee and our education and training partners to think through a process for identifying those emerging industries and that emerging demand, and bring those as well to this committee. So I hope that answered your question. And then I think James Taylor's got a hand up as well.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for those answers. That's actually been the #1 thing that we have had come back from industry, is saying, okay, tell us how, Department of Education at their greatest level can understand emerging technologies when it's just being created right now. So the fact that you have industry involved, that you have workforce involved in this, really answers that for us. So one, I commend you on that task and doing it, handling it that way. Maybe one of the things we can do is articulate that a little bit louder. And we may do that just on the industry side, is partnering with you to get that message out as well, because that is important. If we're doing it this way, then we're going to come up with the answers. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any additional questions for Jackie? Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Jackie. And thank you for the great questions and conversation, members. So on to our last part of the agenda. A vital part of this committee's role is providing an opportunity for secondary and post-secondary students to obtain certifications and other credentials of value that make them career ready. It is my pleasure to recognize Florida Department of Education Vice Chancellor Tara Goodman to provide an update on the application timeline for Career and Professional Education, or CAPE, industry funding list for the 24-25 year. Tara, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair Crowfoot. Well, Dan actually probably covered quite a bit of this during his excellent review of the 24-25 preliminary master credential list. For those of you who are new to the committee, I may tell the existing committee members something they already know, but the core component of the Department of Education's development of its annual CAPE industry certification funding list is the master credential list. It serves as the basis for that. And so we rely heavily upon the processes that work through this review process for new credentials and this establishment of this initial list, preliminary list for 24-25, to build the list that our providers use and receive incentive funding for. So in the case of the school districts, and we don't have the final numbers yet for this fiscal year, but we totally anticipate the Florida Education Finance Program for this current school year 23-24 to be receiving an additional $80 to $100 million in resources as a result of students earning industry certifications that are on the master credential list and that also end up on the CAPE industry certification funding list, as well as those that provide post-secondary funding for both school districts and Florida college system institutions in the amount of $28 million. I think on the next slide, we have just a quick overview of what the timeline looks like for that 24-25 CAPE funding list. We are often challenged on, well, why do you have to develop this list so early? Because it seems like, well, you're going into 24-25 and we're requiring that certifications be submitted by September 30th of 2023 for a 24-25 list. But the reality is our providers need some lead time. So we want to have time to fully vet all the new credentials that are being created out there in the field, and there's always new ones coming on. We have a lot of churn in this area, particularly in the IT field, a lot of new credentials coming on board. So we are anticipating receiving a large number for this September 30th, and we will review those thoroughly for our consideration for the upcoming 24-25 school year. And you guys will receive those applications in February and the February list for consideration that have been reviewed through that framework of quality. So we will then use that master credential list. For the most part, anything that has post-secondary funding designation on that credential will appear on the CAPE industry certification funding list with post-secondary funding eligibility. The department does have the discretion for all other certifications to determine the appropriateness and alignment of those industry certifications for our K-12 CTE students. There are often very high-level certifications that appear on this list that are not appropriate for K-12 students. But when in doubt, when there's any chance that a K-12 student could earn that certification and it's aligned with their K-12 and dual enrollment programs of study, then we are likely to recommend that at the state board level. And so we will build our 24-25 CAPE industry certification funding list using the product that is adopted in February of 2024. We will supplement that with additional digital tool certificates that come in in a separate process that has been outlined in the framework of quality. Districts may apply directly to the school districts for consideration of their digital tools, and then we notify the Credentials Review Committee of our review and recommendations for that. But our ultimate goal is by the beginning of the 24-25 school year to have a fully vetted and adopted list. The department does have to go through a standard rulemaking process for noticing this information and publishing it. But we do target our August board meetings so that all of our providers will know at the beginning of the school year what credentials they may receive performance funding for. So that kind of hopefully illustrates the alignment between this master credential list and the CAPE process that the department manages. And I'm happy to take any questions on this process that the members may have.
Thank you, Tara. Are there any questions from members for Tara? No? Well, thank you so much. So we're now at the open discussion portion of our meeting. Do any of our committee members have a discussion item you'd like to bring forward? No? Okay. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment? I don't see anyone in the chat. Assuming there's no members of the public wishing to comment. Okay, great. So before we conclude today, I'd like to share a high-level summary of the next steps for this committee. As you heard earlier, there are some changes to the labor market information we use. We will work closely with our partners at Florida Commerce and the Department of Education to evaluate the applications that are submitted by the September 30th deadline. The CareerSource Florida team will provide support for applicants that need assistance. We aim to have our next meeting in the November-December timeframe when we will receive an update on the application evaluations and any new developments for our consideration. I encourage stakeholders to regularly view the committee's website under the boardroom link at careersourceflorida.com. This is where information about upcoming meetings, meeting agendas, and the master credential list and application are available. Feel free to contact the CareerSource Florida team with any questions. Thank you all for your time and attention today. Today's meeting and vote marks another milestone for this committee in implementing Florida's REACH Act and updating the master credentials list to include agriculture and aquaculture credentials. I appreciate my colleagues on the committee and our support staff for devoting your time and talent and energy to this process. The Credentials Review Committee's work is vital to helping our state reach the governor's goal that Florida will be a #1 in the nation for workforce education. So thank you all again. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.